The Korean government faced the fury of the middle class earlier this month when it introduced a tax code proposal that was intended to squeeze more tax revenue out of regular income earners.
That's right, it spurred a debate over who exactly falls into the nation's middle class and the fact that there are less and less who qualify these days. For more on the downward trend and what this means for the nation's economy, we are now joined by Arirang's Ji-hye at the newscenter. So Ji-hye, let's first clarify the definition of middle class. In 21st century South Korea, who are we referring to?
Daniel, the OECD defines a nation's middle class as those whose income stands between 50% and 150% of a country's median income. Here in Korea, that would apply to people with incomes between around 16,000 and 50,000 US dollars. But to many in Korea, the perception is that you're in the middle class if you have a house without any mortgages, earn enough money to feed and clothe yourself and your family, educate your kids, and still have a little something left over to stock away. It's a point of reference in a country where there is a stark difference between the reality and the perception of who belongs in the middle class bracket. In a survey conducted by the Hyundai Research Institute on around 1,000 people, more than half of those who fell in the OECD's middle class bracket considered themselves to be in a lower income group. The respondents of the survey said they consider the middle class to be households with a monthly income of around $45,000 after taxes have been accounted for, with total assets of around $700,000. Those totals are inflated compared to the OECD's definition of the middle class, which states that homes with a monthly income of $3,200 and total assets of around $220,000 qualify.
Well, Ji-hye, so where does the wide gap come from?
Well, Yanji, the perception is somewhat based on reality. While income levels do meet the criteria for being in the middle class, they're having to spend more. While the average assets of Korea's middle class rose 13% between 2006 and 2012, soaring housing prices and educational expenses over that same period forced middle class debt to rise 30%.
The most important factor in why people don't consider themselves to be in the middle class depends on the household's income and how much they're spending. Households with more expenditures compared to income will not think of themselves as being middle class.
And Ji, another middle class problem we're facing here in Korea is that the number is shrinking, right?
Exactly, Daniel. A large number of people have fallen out of the middle class since 1997, when the Asian financial crisis hit the nation. The ratio of the middle class defined by the OECD dropped to 67% in 2011, down more than 6 percentage points from 1997. Since then, the gap between the nation's rich and the poor continued to widen, making it difficult for low-income households to rise into the middle class. The nation's slumping growth over the past few years has also caused the gap to further widen.
The middle class is the backbone of a nation's economy. When more households are included in the middle class, it means the nation's economy is developing and stabilizing. But a shrinking middle class means there are either more high-income or more low-income households, which indicates rising uncertainty about the nation's economy and society.
Well, but I can't imagine that Korea is the only nation faced with the problem of a shrinking middle class.
No, the middle class is in decline in other major OECD economies as well. The United States, Japan, France, and the United Kingdom had their middle class ratio drop in 2011 compared to 2007. And the Samsung Economic Research Institute expects the downward trend to continue due to slow growth in those countries. Japan's middle class, meanwhile, was standardized downward, with many households falling into the lower middle class. Germany, however, was able to maintain a relatively stable ratio of the middle class thanks to government policies that boost permanent jobs and focus on vocational training.
So for Korea, what should we do to build up its middle class?
Well, experts say that the government should work on boosting the economy to create more quality jobs. They add that it's also important to lessen the expenditure burdens on households by improving housing and educational policies.
All right, thank you for that, Ji-hye.
That was our Arirang News' Hwang Ji-hye reporting live on the shrinking middle class here in Korea.